Good morning, everyone. Let's talk about a difficult but important truth. Not everyone likes you. In fact, some people may secretly harbor resentment or even dislike toward you. Empathy is the cornerstone of meaningful relationships. Yet it is often overlooked or misunderstood in our fast-pacing, outcome-driven lives. Empathy is not just about understanding someone's words. It's about truly connecting with their feelings, experiences, and perspectives. It's about stepping into their world without judgment, assumptions, or an agenda. When people feel unheard or misunderstood, it creates a rift. That rift may not always be visible, but it can manifest as resentment, frustration, or even hostility. Often, this isn't because they dislike you as a person, it's because they feel unseen. Human beings have an innate need to be recognized, to know that they matter, and that their thoughts and feelings are valued. When that need goes unmet, negative emotions can take root. Empathy begins with listening. Not just hearing, but actively listening. This means putting away distractions, maintaining eye contact, and giving the other person your full attention. It's about listening to understand, not to respond. Too often, conversations become competitions where we're waiting for our turn to speak, rather than truly engaging with what the other person is saying. This lack of presence sends a subtle but clear message. What you're saying isn't important to me. Connection grows when we show curiosity about someone else's life, asking thoughtful questions that go beyond surface level topics, shows that we care. For instance, instead of simply asking, "How are you?" dig deeper. What's been inspiring you lately? Or how have you been navigating the challenges you're facing? These questions signal genuine interest and invite others to share more of themselves with you. But empathy isn't just about words. It's also about actions, simple gestures, like remembering a detail they shared in a previous conversation, offering help when they're struggling, or just being there during difficult times speak volumes. These actions show people that they're more than just a passing thought to you. Now, let's address the common misconception about empathy, that it's about fixing things or solving problems. In truth, empathy isn't about providing answers. It's about providing a safe space for someone to express themselves. Sometimes people don't need advice. They just need to be heard. When you try to fix everything, you risk invalidating their feelings. Instead, practice sitting with their emotions. Pay attention to the grayness in them and pay attention to the grayness in the world. Instead, practice sitting with their emotions. Say things like, "That sounds really difficult," or "I can't imagine how hard that must be for you." This acknowledgement can be incredibly powerful. Ego and vulnerability are two sides of a coin that profoundly influence how we connect with others. Ego often acts as a shield, a protective barrier we use to maintain our image, assert our superiority, or hide our insecurities. Vulnerability, on the other hand, is the antidote to ego. It's the courage to let that shield down, to show our true selves, and to embrace our imperfections. Let's begin by understanding ego. At its core, the ego isn't inherently bad. It's part of what makes us human, our sense of self. However, when left unchecked, ego can become a destructive force in our relationships. It can manifest as arrogance, defensiveness, or an unwillingness to admit fault. When we lead with ego, we prioritize being right over being connected. We focus on our accomplishments, status, or opinions, often at the expense of others' feelings or perspectives. Think about how this plays out in everyday interactions. Have you ever been in a conversation where someone always steered the focus back to themselves? Or perhaps you've encountered someone who never admits they're wrong, even when it's evident. These behaviors, driven by ego, create a sense of distance. They make others feel unheard, undervalued, or even inferior. Over time, this can breed resentment and, yes, even secret dislike. Now let's consider vulnerability, the practice of showing up authentically without pretense or fear of judgment. Vulnerability isn't a weakness, it's a strength. It's the willingness to say, I don't know, I need help, or I made a mistake. It's the courage to share your fears, insecurities, or failures, even when it feels uncomfortable. Why does vulnerability matter so much? Because it fosters trust and connection. When you're vulnerable, you signal to others that you're human, just like them. You invite them to let their guard down as well. This mutual openness creates a sense of belonging, a feeling that we're in this together. Take, for example, leaders who admit their mistakes. Instead of losing respect, they often gain it. Why? Because their vulnerability makes them relatable. It shows they're not trying to be perfect, but they're committed to growth and authenticity. The same applies in personal relationships. When you share your struggles or insecurities, it encourages others to do the same. This exchange deepens your connection and makes people feel safe in your presence. But let's be honest, vulnerability is not easy. It requires letting go of control, risking rejection, and confronting your own fears. It's especially challenging in a world that often equates vulnerability with weakness. Yet the truth is, vulnerability is the ultimate display of courage. It's the moment when you choose connection over perfection, empathy over ego. The interplay between ego and vulnerability is where growth happens. Ego says, I can't let them see me fail. Vulnerability counters with, failure is part of my journey. Ego says, I need to prove my worth. Vulnerability responds, my worth is inherent. I don't need to prove it. By balancing the two, you cultivate not only self-awareness, but also stronger, more authentic relationships. In practice, embracing vulnerability means being intentional. It means pausing before reacting defensively and asking yourself, am I acting out of ego or am I fostering connection? It means challenging the narrative that you must always have it together. And it means being open to feedback, even when it's uncomfortable. Ultimately, ego separates and vulnerability unites. When you prioritize vulnerability over ego, you pave the way for genuine connection, mutual respect, and understanding. People don't need you to be perfect. They need you to be real. And when you show up authentically, you create an environment where resentment and dislike have little room to grow. Values are the invisible compass that guide our decisions, actions, and relationships. They are the core principles we hold dear: integrity, respect, loyalty, honesty, and so on. When our values align with those around us, we feel a sense of harmony and trust. But when there's a misalignment of values, whether real or perceived, it can create tension, distrust, and in some cases, resentment. Let's start by understanding what values misalignment looks like in practice. Imagine working with someone who claims to prioritize teamwork, but consistently takes credit for others' work. Or consider a friend who emphasizes loyalty, but repeatedly shares your private matters with others. These actions, which contradict the values they claim to uphold, lead to feelings of betrayal and frustration. Over time, these inconsistencies can erode trust and foster negative feelings. Values misalignment doesn't always stem from hypocrisy or bad intentions. Sometimes it's simply a matter of differing priorities. For example, you might value honesty above all else, while someone else prioritizes harmony. In a situation where truth-telling creates conflict, their choice to avoid the truth might clash with your values, leaving you feeling frustrated or disrespected. The issue of values misalignment also surfaces in leadership and organizations. When leaders say they value transparency but make decisions behind closed doors, or when a company touts a commitment to sustainability but engages in environmentally harmful practices, it sends a message of inauthenticity. Employees, customers, and stakeholders quickly notice these discrepancies, leading to skepticism and distrust. Why is this so damaging? Because values are deeply personal. They represent what we stand for and how we see the world. When someone acts in a way that conflicts with our values, it can feel like a personal affront. It's as if they are invalidating the principles that define who we are. So how can we address values misalignment? It begins with self-awareness and clarity. Take the time to identify your own core values. What truly matters to you? What principles guide your behavior and decision-making? When you're clear on your own values, you're better equipped to recognize when there's a misalignment with others. And the next step is to communicate openly. Values misalignment often goes unresolved because people avoid discussing it. They might fear conflict or assume the other person won't understand, but avoiding the conversation only deepens the divide. Instead, approach the issue with curiosity and respect. For example, you might say, I noticed that we seem to have different approaches to the specific situation. Can we talk about how we might align better? It's also important to acknowledge that no one is perfect. Even with the best intentions, people sometimes act in ways that conflict with their values. This doesn't automatically mean they are inauthentic or untrustworthy. What matters is how they respond when the misalignment is brought to their attention. Are they willing to reflect, acknowledge their mistake, and make an effort to improve? For organizations, addressing values misalignment requires a culture of accountability. Leaders must not only define the company's core values, but also live them consistently. This means making decisions that align with those values, even when it's inconvenient or challenging. For example, if a company claims to prioritize diversity, it must actively invest in creating an inclusive environment, not just issue statements during awareness months. Perceived inauthenticity is one of the most damaging impressions you can leave on others. Authenticity is the foundation of trust and respect. And when people feel that you are not genuine, they are less likely to engage with you openly or form a meaningful connection. Inauthenticity doesn't necessarily mean outright dishonesty. It often stems from inconsistencies, mixed signals, or actions that don't align with your words. Let's explore what perceived inauthenticity looks like in real life. Imagine a colleague who always talks about being a team player, but avoids collaboration when it doesn't benefit them. Or think about someone who says they value honesty, but sugarcoats the truth to avoid difficult conversations. These behaviors, even if unintentional, make others question the person's sincerity. Over time, this doubt can erode trust and lead to feelings of resentment or dislike. One of the most common causes of perceived inauthenticity is a mismatch between words and actions. People notice when your behavior doesn't align with what you claim to value or believe. For example, if you advocate for work-life balance, but constantly overwork yourself and others, it creates a disconnect. This inconsistency sends a message that your words are just lip service, not a true reflection of your principles. Another contributing factor is putting on a facade or trying too hard to fit in. While it's natural to want to be liked or accepted, pretending to be someone you're not is a surefire way to come across as inauthentic. People have an uncanny ability to sense when someone is being insincere, whether it's adopting opinions you don't truly believe in, exaggerating achievements, or presenting a version of yourself that doesn't feel genuine. These actions can leave others feeling uneasy or mistrustful. Perceived inauthenticity can also arise from poor communication. For instance, if you avoid addressing conflicts, give vague responses, or fail to follow through on commitments, people may interpret these actions as a lack of transparency or integrity. Even when your intentions are good, the perception of dishonesty or insincerity can persist if your communication isn't clear and consistent. And the consequences of perceived inauthenticity go beyond personal relationships. In professional settings, it can lead to diminished credibility, reduced influence, and strained collaborations. Leaders, in particular, face heightened scrutiny in this regard. When leaders fail to embody the values or culture they promote, it creates a ripple effect of distrust across their teams. Employees are less likely to be engaged or motivated when they feel their leaders are not walking the talk. So how can you ensure that you are perceived as authentic? The first step is self-awareness. Take time to reflect on your values, beliefs, and intentions. Ask yourself, do my actions consistently reflect who I am and what I stand for? If there's a disconnect, work on aligning your behavior with your principles. Authenticity starts with knowing yourself and staying true to that understanding. Another key aspect is transparency. Be honest about your thoughts, feelings, and intentions, even when it's uncomfortable. This doesn't mean sharing every detail of your life. It means being open about what matters and avoiding pretense. For example, if you're unsure about something, admit it. If you've made a mistake, own up to it. People appreciate honesty, even when it involves vulnerability. Consistency is also critical. Authenticity isn't a one-time effort. It's demonstrated through your daily actions and choices. Be consistent in how you treat others, the promises you make, and the standards you uphold. When people see that you are dependable and true to your word, they are more likely to trust and respect you. It's also important to embrace your individuality. You don't need to please everyone or conform to others' expectations to be authentic. In fact, authenticity often involves standing firm in your values and beliefs, even when it's unpopular. This doesn't mean being rigid or dismissive of others' perspectives. It means being confident enough in yourself to engage in honest dialogue and respectful disagreement. The reasons why people might secretly harbor negative feelings toward you are complex and multifaceted, from a lack of empathy and connection to ego-driven defensiveness, from misalignments in values to perceived inauthenticity. These factors create barriers that prevent genuine relationships from forming. However, recognizing these challenges is the first step toward personal growth and building stronger, more authentic connections with others. It all comes down to one fundamental truth. People are drawn to those who are real, empathetic, and consistent. When you lead with vulnerability and embrace empathy, when you stay true to your values and communicate openly, and when you act with authenticity, your relationships will not only thrive, but they will also be rooted in trust and respect. No one is perfect, and we will all make mistakes along the way. but it's how we respond to those mistakes that matter. If we are willing to reflect, learn, and adapt, we can overcome the barriers of ego, misalignment, and inauthenticity. And so, ultimately, building strong, positive relationships requires a commitment to self-awareness, openness, and mutual respect. So as we go forward, let's strive to be the kind of people who connect with others genuinely, who embrace vulnerability, and who are consistent in our actions. In doing so, we will not only avoid the reasons people might secretly dislike us, but also create a lasting environment where people feel seen, heard, and valued.